In the ecosystem of any modern workplace, there are dynamics that operate just beneath the surface. They are unseen forces that shape careers, define cultures, and ultimately determine the fate of our best ideas. Today, we're going to undertake a deep analysis of one of the most potent of these forces, a professional dynamic that is as common as it is corrosive. We aren't here to simply describe a behavior, but to really dissect it, to understand its anatomy, its psychological drivers, and its true long-term costs. We are examining the archetype of the credit taker.
Our examination is going to follow a clear and deliberate path. First, we will set the scene, reconstructing a moment that I suspect many of us have experienced with a kind of visceral clarity. From there, we'll explore the insecurity engine that powers this behavior. Then, we'll develop a field guide to help identify its subtle tactics, analyze the profound and often hidden price of perception, and we'll conclude with a strategic framework for building true, lasting credibility. So, we begin where the impact is first felt. Let's reconstruct a professional moment that is, for many, deeply, deeply familiar. It's a moment where hard work and quiet contribution collide with loud, strategic visibility. Think about the effort, the weeks of focused, often solitary work, the sheer intellectual and emotional capital you've invested in untangling a truly complex problem. Think of the late nights, not for show, but for substance, the tough decisions made in quiet confidence, the dead ends you explored, the breakthroughs achieved in those silent hours when the office is completely empty. This is the unseen foundation of all progress. It's the work done in the trenches, driven by a commitment to the craft itself. And then comes the moment of presentation, the high-stakes meeting where all that work is finally brought into the light. The room is filled with decision-makers, with stakeholders whose opinions carry real weight. The project, the culmination of all that effort, is up on the screen. There's a palpable tension in the air. The outcome of weeks of labor is hanging in the balance. And then, someone else stands up. They speak with a practiced, compelling confidence. They walk through the solution, your solution, with an air of innate, effortless ownership. The narrative they weave is skillful. It places them at the decisive center of every key milestone. And as you sit there, the intricate work you performed is reframed, simplified, and absorbed into their personal brand. Your contribution is silently, professionally erased.
This brings us to a formal definition, the credit taker. Now, this is not merely a clumsy opportunist. This is a specific professional archetype, a personality who strategically and often with considerable subtlety co-opts the work of others. Their primary goal isn't just to take credit for a single success, but to meticulously manufacture a perception of value and influence that is not supported by their actual contribution. It's a long-term campaign of perception management.
And this is the central question that has to guide our analysis. From a distance, the behavior can look compelling. It can be mistaken for decisive leadership, for bold ownership, but is that what it really is? Is this a demonstration of genuine professional confidence born from real capability? Or is it something else entirely, a deep and powerful insecurity simply disguised in the language and posture of confidence? This question takes us from the what to the why. It takes us right to the psychological core of the issue. So now we moved from the action to the impulse. To truly understand the credit taker, we have to look beneath the surface of their behavior and examine the psychological engine that drives them. This isn't about simple ambition. It's about a profound sense of internal deficit that demands constant external validation.
At the very heart of this behavior, you'll find three fundamental fears. First, there's the fear of being invisible, the terror that one's presence and efforts will go completely unnoticed in a competitive environment. Second, the fear of being irrelevant, of becoming obsolete, of having no unique, defensible value to offer. And then, beneath it all, the most potent driver, that persistent, gnawing fear of just not being good enough. It's an imposter syndrome so profound that it compels a desperate, ceaseless search for proof to the contrary.
This internal fear creates a flawed psychological equation that governs their entire professional life. For the credit taker, recognition isn't a nice byproduct of good work. It's a shield. It's perceived as a form of professional safety, a defense against the threats of invisibility and irrelevance. And in the same way, validation from leadership isn't just feedback. It becomes the very bedrock of their professional identity. They need to be seen as valuable in order to feel valuable. Credit, therefore, becomes a shortcut to both safety and identity, a way to soothe that underlying anxiety.
And right here, we find the central, self-defeating paradox of this whole behavior. You see,
The act of claiming credit for work you didn't do creates an immediate, visible gain. But it comes at the direct expense of developing the actual skill, the real capability that the credit implies. Every single act of appropriation is a missed opportunity for genuine growth. This creates a dangerous dependency on perception, and a foundation built on perception rather than substance is inherently profoundly weak.
Now that we understand the internal motivation, let's turn our attention to its external manifestation. The tactics of a credit taker are rarely overt acts of theft. They are masters of nuance, of framing. This section serves as a kind of field guide, designed to help you identify the behavioral patterns that are often felt long before they are consciously understood.
The pattern usually unfolds in distinct steps. First, there's strategic visibility. They are conspicuously absent during the difficult, messy, uncertain phases of the work, but they appear precisely at the moment of presentation and recognition. Second, language framing. You have to listen closely to the pronouns. The collaborative we that characterize the work phase is subtly replaced with the authoritative I. We explored options becomes I decided on this direction. The team discovered an issue becomes I identified a key risk. Third is contribution amplification. A minor suggestion or a small piece of feedback offered in passing is later framed as a pivotal, game-changing insight that guided the entire project. And finally, the most passive but powerful tactic, credit absorption. When a leader mistakenly assigns them credit, they don't correct the record. Their silence, maybe with a humble nod, acts as confirmation. When this behavior is tolerated or, even worse, rewarded, it has a deeply corrosive effect on the entire organization. It sends a clear and dangerous message. What matters here is not the quality of your contribution, but the effectiveness of your self-promotion. It cultivates a culture where perception is more valuable than reality, where looking like a leader is more important than actually leading. And this quietly discourages the real contributors, it breeds a deep-seated cynicism, and it ultimately erodes the organization's capacity for genuine innovation.
So the damage to a team's morale is clear, but what is the true cost to the individual who engages in this behavior? Well, the gains are immediate and visible, but the losses are delayed, hidden, and far more significant. We're now going to analyze the profound long-term price of building a career on a foundation of perception.
Let's just contrast the two ledgers. In the short term, the gains are seductive. You get immediate recognition from leadership, a quick rise in visibility across the organization, and the appearance of significant influence. But the long-term costs? They are severe. Because they've essentially outsourced their learning to others, they experience shallow professional growth. Because colleagues see the pattern with perfect clarity, a deep and often irreversible trust deficit forms around them. And because their reputation is built on claims rather than proof, it becomes exceedingly fragile, perpetually vulnerable to a single moment of exposure.
This leads to a devastating psychological trap, what you could call the internal insecurity loop. The more they rely on perception, the more their confidence becomes dependent on external validation, not their own internal capability. With each unearned claim, the gap between their public reputation and their private reality widens, and that chronic fear of exposure just grows and grows. And deep down, they are acutely aware of this gap. They know what is real and what is performance. And this knowledge, this constant low-grade anxiety of being found out, it doesn't solve their insecurity, it amplifies it. It reinforces the very fear that drove the behavior in the first place. Now, acknowledging this dynamic is the first step, but navigating it effectively, that's the next. This final section is not about confrontation, it's about strategy. We're going to outline a framework for the effective professional to protect their contributions, build authentic authority, and most importantly, cultivate a career based on the enduring power of substance.
This framework consists of 5 strategic pillars. Number 1, redefine ownership. Shift your internal focus from chasing visibility to creating undeniable value. 2, document contribution, not with aggression, but with process. Regular, documented progress updates in shared channels create a clear, time-stamped, and traceable record of your work. 3, speak with precision. If you must correct the record, do so calmly and constructively. A simple phrase like, to add some context on how the team arrived at that solution, can recenter the narrative without initiating a conflict. 4, build direct credibility. Don't wait for others to represent your work. Proactively seek out opportunities to present your own findings and own your own narrative. And 5, the most critical step, strengthen inner security. For anyone who might recognize these tendencies in themselves, the true work is to shift the focus from looking capable to the much harder, more rewarding work of becoming capable. And for those of you in leadership, the directive here is unambiguous. Your organization's culture is a direct and undeniable reflection of what you celebrate.
If you consistently reward the most visible person in the room, you will cultivate a culture of performance and politics. But if you make the effort to look deeper, to identify and reward the actual contributors, especially the quiet ones, you will build a culture of substance, of trust, and of genuine, sustainable achievement.
Ultimately, we have to distinguish between two vastly different timelines. Taking credit is a short-term tactic. It can secure a victory in a single meeting, a single project, a single moment. But credibility is a long-term strategic asset. It is built slowly, block by block, through consistent, verifiable contribution. Moments are fleeting. Careers are built on the bedrock of credibility.
This brings us back to our central question of confidence versus insecurity. And the truth is, real professional confidence is rarely loud. It doesn't need to constantly announce its own value. It's rooted in the quiet, internal knowledge of one's own capability. A capability that, when nurtured through real work, compounds over time like interest and speaks for itself through the consistent creation of undeniable value.
Because in the final accounting of a career, of a project, of a team's success, a simple truth always endures. The bright spotlight of a single presentation eventually fades. The memory of a confident claim dissolves into ambiguity. What remains, what is remembered, is the work itself, the thing that was built, and people always, eventually, remember who did the building, not who simply made the claim.